Well, just to let you know, and I mentioned it in the if you caught the promo, I have a short promo that airs just before the 8 o'clock news coming out of Rush Limbaugh's update, and then there's my promo, time check, weather check, all of that. I had mentioned that this situation in Washington was likely just a potentially a false alarm. If you've not been hearing about it, there was a report of an active. Now it's 10 o'clock in Washington. The civilian workforce at the Navy Yard, they managed to roll in between 8:30 and 9 o'clock for the most part. You have a lot of the people who are actually servicemen and women who are there likely earlier during the course of a morning. And there was a report of an active shooter in the area. Now, they take this seriously because 2 years ago, there was just a terrible shooting that took place there. 13 people were killed, if you remember that. In fact, I have a friend. It's one of the best friends I ever worked with in television. And he was in the military for 21 years, 4 years in the Air Force, and then the following 17 in the Navy. And he was actually posted at the Navy Yard for a while, which he loved because his mother lived just a few blocks away at the time. So he was able to stay at his mother's house while he was actually on duty at the Navy Yard for a couple of years. And then his career took him elsewhere. He was a news anchor for Navy TV. They do that sort of thing. And I remember him telling me at the time of the shooting, he said there was a reason that people in the inner city of Washington, and my friend Dave, by the way, is what you would describe politically correctness would describe him, or political correctness, as a person of color. And Dave said there is a reason people are armed in the city, whether or not government likes it, and that's because you have to be on the lookout for yourself. And he also reminded me that they're not allowed to carry any firearms at the Navy Yard because it's considered a military, like a base, like a military installation. The same reason at Fort Hood that whack job Islamic radical got up on that table and was able to gun down so many of his fellow soldiers, calling it workplace violence, of course, but the reason he was able to do that is because no one could really fire back and take him out. Imagine that, being on a military base and not being allowed to be armed. It defies all logic. There's just, you can't understand it. But the situation this morning looks as if someone may have heard a backfire, or there may have been, but people are on edge because we have the Department of Homeland Security, and as well as a lot of other government agencies, warning us of potential terrorist attacks coming up this weekend. Now, often when you hear about those, I always say I look at those warnings and take them with a pinch of salt, because I think there are people in government who want you constantly worried and want you constantly afraid. But remember, we used to fight the bad guys overseas. Now we're going to have to fight them here. And for all of those people who've whined about what we did in combat over the last 15 years in various countries, there was a reason we were fighting them there, because we didn't that way have to fight them here. And now we may be fighting them here, and that's a good possibility. And while I take the government's warning sometimes, with John Desai, I also realize that the same people who were overseeing that manhunt in upstate New York. Now you got a couple of nitwits who are running around in prison garb, which they had on for 3 weeks, making them easily identifiable, running around in a forest, and for 3 weeks nobody could find them. Hello. And you wonder what would happen if an organized terrorist network from around the world was sending people across our southern border or our northern border and sending them into this country. Could they blend in well, or how long would it take for people to find them? Because they wouldn't necessarily be dressed in prison fatigues. They would be blending in with the general public. And that's, I think, a major concern people have this upcoming Independence Day weekend. And I don't blame people if you're hearing those warnings and you're a little concerned. Now, is it a big deal in places like southern Idaho or northern Utah and Nevada? Probably not. But as a friend of mine, and speaking of friends who were in the Navy, another friend, he lives in Seattle, he was talking with me after he got out of the Navy, and not long after that 9/11 took place. And I remember we had a conversation, and it came down to this. The day that the terrorists start attacking big box stores in places like Ames, Iowa, then the American people are going to be in a panic. It was just a TV show for a lot of people. Watching it, it's a horrible TV show, but watching it from places like Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania, and New York City, and as well as the Pentagon on September 11th, 14 years ago. But if it starts happening in smaller communities, and the terrorists have not yet figured this one out, and that's probably a good thing, if it were to happen in smaller communities, and you think about that. I was just talking with one of my coworkers. He's driving to Cheyenne this weekend, and he's going to be spending the Independence Day weekend in Wyoming. But we were talking about all the little stops along places like Route 80, where someone could pull into a small town, create all sorts of havoc in a matter of minutes in a parking lot at a big box store, and then be back on the highway on the on ramp in a matter of minutes, if not less, and fleeing and flying out of town. And these are things that we have to consider. But the Navy Yard in Washington, now here's the interesting thing about that. That neighborhood used to be one of the worst in D.C. And then when the Washington Nationals moved to town, coming from, in fact, Montreal, Canada, talk about an invasion, but the Washington Nationals played briefly at the old RFK Stadium, which is a dump. I've been by it many times. It is a complete dump when it comes to stadiums. They played there for a brief period, and then they had a new stadium built down by the Navy Yard. And when that happened, it really transformed the neighborhood. There are new hotels that are going up there. People have moved in with young families. People are pushing strollers around. And for the most part, not completely, but for the most part, the dope dealers who used to occupy all the street corners are gone. They decided to pack up and go somewhere else. On the other hand, if there are still a few in the neighborhood, and a couple of them were out with a little bit of gunplay this morning because somebody was taking somebody else's corner, then that could easily get reported as an attack, perhaps at the Navy Yard, and bring out this massive response. I'm not opposed to the massive response, though, either. If this is a good test, I mean, consider it a drill. If we're worried about things that could be happening in this country over the weekend, consider this a drill. And from what I have seen, it's been a great response from law enforcement. And it was quick, and it was urgent, and it just shows you that they are ready in case something does happen. 8:13, Bill Colley with you this morning. A beautiful morning and a beautiful weekend ahead. We may have some clouds on Sunday, but by that point, you'll be so filled up with hot dogs and burgers and the like, you probably will be looking forward to a rest, because if you've got the 3-day weekend starting tomorrow, which most of us do, you'll have had plenty of time to celebrate Independence Day. On the other hand, if you've got Monday off, it might be cloudy on Sunday, but Monday looks pretty good too. We don't expect any rain likely in the forecast until maybe Tuesday. And this time of year, when you get rain that far out in the forecast, sometimes I think that the prognosticators, that is, the weathermen and women, that they are just trying to say, well, it's really dry. It's got to rain sometime. So they pick a day, a week to 10 days out and say it'll probably rain here. And then by the time we get there, if it doesn't, well, you probably forgot that they said it might. Just to give you a quick tip, if you're out and doing anything special, though, this weekend, it's still going to remain hot. Not quite as hot. The temperature's over 90 degrees every day. So you got to keep that in mind if you're at a picnic. What is it they say on TV, too, as well? Remember, when it's hot out, keep well hydrated. Do you sit around with your family and say, would you like another cup of hydration? Whenever I see those remedial life stories on TV, remember, when it's cold outside, before you go outdoors, put on some clothes. Or remember, if it's hot outside, have some liquids. What liquids? What are you? Are they going to pop your hood, check the dipstick, and then add a few more quarts? Is that how that works? They're talking about water, or you could have lemonade if you prefer, but they're basically talking about water. Well, they talk about that. So when you hear them talking in those technical terms, we used to say in the newsroom, you got to be conversational, because people aren't sitting around the local diner in the morning saying, oh, I didn't feel well last night because I wasn't well hydrated after I came home from work. The guy basically says, well, I didn't drink much water. It was really hot. I came home and fell asleep in the chair. That would be more like reality and how people really talk in these situations. So we welcome you here this morning, and I'd like to give you kind of a lay of the land of what's going on over the next couple of hours. Well, all right, $1:45 now on the program. I expect we'll see Sergeant Keith Thompson from Idaho State Police coming up in about 15 minutes. Idaho State Police last night, in fact, I happened to see it in an email. Idaho State Police released a crime report, yearly crime report. I didn't get a lot of time to look at it. We may not necessarily focus on that this morning because I'm sure with the Independence Day weekend, there's some more urgent things that they would like to talk about, such as if you're holding an M80 and you light it, get rid of it. If you keep holding it, you're going to have some serious problems. And if you're a young person, that's no way that you want to go through life. Some of the other things that I hope to talk about this morning. It was never one of my favorite TV shows, but I was never one of those people who bashed the Dukes of Hazzard, as a lot of you elitists did. I never bashed that particular TV show simply because it was amusing, if nothing else. It was farce, but it has been banned from a TV network because there's a Confederate flag on the car. And if you see that, you might see an episode and suddenly be gripped by an urge to go kill a group of people in a church. So it's been banned from TV. Also coming up a little later in the program, if we get an opportunity, I want to share with you some comments. We're going to talk a little bit about Patriots Night, which is taking place in Twin Falls at the College of Southern Idaho this evening. But I want to share with you some thoughts that some people on a boardwalk in California had when they were asked about Independence Day. 8:17, and you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's on your mind?
Good morning. Well, first of all, we keep calling it the 4th of July instead of Independence Day. You hardly hear Independence Day even mentioned. But, as far as these convicts that escaped, that could have been eliminated real easily with just put a chip in them. They would have known exactly what they were up to, and all along. So any of these hardened criminals, I think it'd just be mandatory. Put a chip in them, they wouldn't have got very far, even if they would have known that they were doing what they were doing.
Yeah, so, if I recall, when I was a kid, I used to be told that convicted felons lost a lot of their constitutional rights.
Well, they're putting chips in new babies. Why can't we put them in hardened criminals?
I have another thought. A friend of mine emailed me this morning and said, why didn't New York State just allow the two of them to get married, and then we could have settled the whole thing in one fell swoop?
There you go. Yeah. Well, have a great Independence Day, everybody.
And you too as well. Thank you much for the telephone call. You see that, and that's another point to be made. If Bo and Luke Duke were suddenly to announce that they were going to be married, the networks would be lining up to share that particular TV show. They are brave and courageous men, and so therefore we have to spend an hour detailing. Or if Bo and Luke Duke suddenly decided tomorrow that they both wanted to be Daisy, then of course we would have a Barbara Walters interview. Well, she's retired now, but she might come out of retirement. Well, the Diane Sawyer maybe, because she's next in the old lady line. The anchor line over at ABC News. But the fact of the matter is, you'd have to have them on TV for an hour to 2 hours discussing that and being told how brave and wonderful they were, and a credit to humanity and just what you might call a role model for anyone else out there who had the same feelings. But the show does not go on as far as Dukes of Hazzard, not anytime soon. It's 8:19. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 74. Looking forward to a nice day today. Probably highs still in the mid to upper 90s. We'll have details on the weather, of course, coming up shortly. Do hope you can stick around. I've got a lot to talk about, obviously. This is the last day before a 3-day weekend, so we're trying to get through a lot of material before we wrap up the week. This is appropriate, but I did not select this music. There it is. Gives it a little bit of what you might call a hill country feel. I wanted to share with you a little bit more detail on this. TV Land pulls Dukes of Hazzard episodes off its schedule. Now, I got notified by a friend last night about this, and he was talking about how pretty soon, all of those old episodes that you sometimes see in reruns of All in the Family will be gone as well. There's one where Archie is arguing with his son-in-law, and Mike Stivic, known as the Meathead, and they get into an argument about some guy named Roger that Mike's having over for lunch. And Archie says some rather disparaging things about Roger's lifestyle choice. And then they get into an argument, and Mike tries to tell him that, certain things in England are perfectly legal between two consenting adults. Now, of course, this is from a TV show 40-some years ago. And Archie says, let me tell you something about England for your information. And then he goes on to say something very disparaging about England. And I was commenting to my friend, those will be next, because Archie uses the infamous F word. And he's not talking about flags on Independence Day. That's not what he's talking about. But the headline is followed by this: Jessica Dershowitz writing at Entertainment Weekly, TV Land has pulled reruns of The Dukes of Hazzard off its schedule. A spokesperson for the network confirmed to Entertainment Weekly on Wednesday. The network didn't say it had anything to do with the Duke Boys' car, but you can pretty much figure this one out. NASCAR actually removed the flag from the top of the car a few years ago when it was featured, as a pace car in the race. I'm sorry, folks, but I don't know anyone who ever took one look at that car and said, I must go shoot someone now. It's not telegraphing anything. It's just meant to be goofy fun. 825. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story at News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com.
You know, Bill, I could have sworn a year ago I thought the world was going crazy. Nah, they weren't going crazy then. They're just plumb insane. I mean, this political correctness has gone so far that it's not even funny. The American flag is going to be next. It's going to be, because it's going to be related to the oppression of the blacks and so on and so forth. But nobody wants to go back to the main history. They just want to stay on one topic, because if they can get rid of our history, then they can do whatever they want. And they're not teaching our kids history anymore. That's why they don't care. They don't care about our culture or anything else. And it's just amazing how people don't see that the people that are screaming for tolerance are the most intolerant people I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, and I think it's only going to get worse. There was a story I saw today at Crisis Magazine that's asking, are they going to stop selling Guy Fawkes masks? Now, these are the masks that your Occupy demonstrators and other lefties wear. But that guy was, from England's perspective, he was a terrorist trying to blow up Parliament and the King. So therefore, if you're walking around in one of his masks, you must be a hater and you must be promoting the notion of killing people.
Well, you know, the thing that gets me is it seems like to me over the last couple of years that the more they get their way, the worse it gets. And the more they change stuff that's supposed to heal, the more mad certain people get. It just doesn't make sense. Right is wrong, wrong is right, up is down, down is up. It's just all it is.
Thanks for the call. Understand your concern, and I think that what we have to do is, Bill O'Reilly said it last night, and I like the guy. I met him once at a book signing. We were doing a receiving line, in fact, for a Boy Scouts of America event. And he's a nice guy, but I don't think he's necessarily profound. But he was saying last night, if the right wants to counter what's going on, it has to get its act together and work together. That means just because someone may not necessarily share your view on the fair tax or the flat tax, you can kind of find some common ground in what you're talking about and go forward. Speaking of schools trying to rewrite history, I'm going to share with you some comments made by people when they were asked about, a little later in the program if I get a chance, about people who were asked about, and these are normal adults, asked about the Independence Day holiday, what it stands for, and what it was all about, when it took place, when the Declaration was signed, who signed it. And the only person who got it right, any detail about it right, was an Italian tourist. It's a shame. I mean, it tells you a great deal about what's going on in our culture, and I think that it's we've reached almost that breaking point, I would say. Very quickly, speaking of that Confederate flag issue, Suffolk University USA Today poll conducted 2 weeks ago, this is from the Washington Post, after the apparently racially motivated shooting and a week after calls for the flag to come down, it found that 42% of Americans think the flag is racist and should be removed from state grounds, but 42% said they think the flag is not racist and represents Southern history. And the numbers, of course, if you're a Democrat, 63% say the flag is racist. 61% of Republicans say it's not. And I imagine that the overwhelming, if you actually went down to the old states of Dixie and you said to them, is this flag racist? The numbers about heritage would be even much, much higher. And the headline says, did Republicans jump the gun on the Confederate flag? In other words, they thought perhaps that they were trying to test which way the political wind was blowing, and they all raced and said, I'm going to denounce that flag, and we must tear it down, rip it up, burn it, and get rid of it forever. Oh, wait a minute. You're telling me people actually don't mind it. Well, as I was just saying, it's a wonderful reminder of the heritage of... Look, we've got more coming up in a few minutes. I'll share that clip with you, too, from California.